Welcome into the PFN Bengals podcast. I am Dallas Robinson. He is Jay Morrison, fresh off injured reserve, pup. I don't know what we want to call it, but he returned from illness. We were supposed to record yesterday. We are now recording today to go over all these transactions and moves the Bengals made these past couple days. But Jay, I think the most important thing everyone wants to know is how are you feeling as you recover from this couple-day illness?
Back from the dead, I think would be the most accurate way to put it. It was a rough couple days, but I'm feeling, when you're sick and you get back to like 80%, it feels like 100.
Yes.
I mean, I can't imagine what the next few days are going to feel like when I get all the way back, but it just feels awesome to be out of bed and able to do this podcast. I know we were supposed to do it yesterday, but I literally couldn't talk. We had a meeting, a staff meeting yesterday, and I'm just typing in stuff in the chat because I couldn't talk, but everything's good now. Appreciate all the well wishes on Twitter, and looking forward to diving back in. We got a lot of Bengals stuff to get to today.
Yes, we do. We're all glad to hear you're feeling better. And you're right. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's obviously roster cutdown week, practice squads, transactions going on all over the NFL. But I think that the main thing that we've got to talk about from Bengals land is Ja'Marr Chase's contract, right?
Yeah.
He returned to practice for one day, one exact day, two days.
Sunday and Monday.
Zach Taylor says he expects Ja'Marr Chase to practice and that everything is fine. And we've got a plan for week one. And then yesterday, Ja'Marr Chase does not practice. So now it feels like we're maybe not quite back to square one, but it feels odd. We don't know exactly where things stand yet. Bengals will practice later this afternoon. We'll see if Ja'Marr participates in that or if he doesn't. We're a week plus away from regular season, Jay. Where do things stand with Ja'Marr? Like, what are your thoughts on if he's going to be available for week one, how this makes Zach Taylor look, everything involved with Ja'Marr? Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, there's so many thoughts. I thought it was a really bad look. I mean, not just not practicing a day after Zach said he would, but the way he sauntered in, late after the practice already started. It's just like he was trying to make a point, kind of just threw Zach under the bus. Either they're not talking as much as people believe they are, and this plan is in Zach's head. It's not something they've actually worked out, or they are talking and Ja'Marr just totally went back on what he had told Zach he would do. And that's what it feels like is what happened. We don't know that for sure, but it's not a great look. As far as him being ready for week one, Joe Burrow said it. I think Zach knows it too. They practice at 1 today or at 1:30 today, whether he's out there or not. It is open to the media. We will find out if he's practicing or not, but I don't think that matters. He could come. He could even miss Monday. He could come back Wednesday, I think, practice Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, be good to go for Monday. Zach did say he's fully healthy. He's in great condition. He's kept himself in shape. He's got the rapport with Joe Burrow. He knows the scheme. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Which is why I never thought he was going to miss games all along. And I don't understand this tact because we talked about it a lot. Like, Mike Brown just doesn't lose these staring contests. And Ja'Marr is running the risk of, kind of, I don't want to say angering, but the Bengals, they have all the leverage here. And if he wants to play this game, and if he does want to sit out games, which again, I don't think was going to happen because he's going to lose more leverage because the Bengals are going to go 3-1 without him. And you sit out and they keep winning, that doesn't look good for you. But if he does do something like that, I mean, the Bengals don't just own him for 2 more. And I don't want to say own him. That's a bad way to say it. We're talking about another human being. They control his rights for 2 more years. They can just say, fine, we're not negotiating next year either, and we'll put the franchise tag on you in 2026. And so they can stick to their guns, whatever the dollar amount they're at right now. They don't have to budge off of that, and it's kind of like a take it or leave it thing. I don't think that's the way it's going to play out. I think this is going to get smoothed over. We've seen too many other instances of this where guys have been disgruntled and they think G. Higgins, Jonah Williams, Trey Hendrickson, it goes on and on. They figure out a way to smooth it out, and points are made, and then feelings are hurt and then mended. And so I don't think it's going to get to that, but I think Ja'Marr has to be careful because it could get to that where he's – if he's going to threaten to sit out games, the Bengals could really play hardball here, and there's not a lot Ja'Marr can do.
And I'm not sure what he would get by sitting out games besides just sending a message. I mean, at a certain point, if he misses too many games, he's eventually delaying his free agency. I mean, if he misses a certain amount of games and doesn't pick up that accrued season, I don't think that's ever going to come to anything close to that. I mean, I can't imagine that it would, but it does make you wonder where negotiations stand if something specific happened that made Jamar angry, that led him to not go to this practice. Like, did the CD Lamb contract play a part in this? CD Lamb is now at $34 million a year, just under Jamar Jefferson at $35 million a year. Did that figure play some role in where Jamar is with the Bengals? That's pure speculation. We really don't know, but it just felt so odd. It felt like, okay, Jamar made his statement over the summer. Now we're going to get back to business. So to have this kind of hiccup here, it makes you wonder, did something behind the scenes that we don't know? I'd like to say that this will all be resolved and that Jamar will be back at practice next week. And that's kind of how I thought things were going to go. But after yesterday, I really don't know. It feels like things are more up in the air. And you're right. If he doesn't practice today, it's not the end of the world. As long as he's back next week and he's ready for week one, things will be fine. But this is just getting more – it's getting to the level of distraction that I didn't think it would be. And I think when you heard Zach Taylor talk yesterday, you're right that it was absolutely a bad look for Jamar to put Zach in that situation. You know, Zach is having to answer all these questions all the time because the Bengals don't really have they don't put anybody else out there. They don't have a GM who's answering questions about this type of thing. Zach has to take the brunt of it. So the fact that he has to spend 2 minutes talking about this, and I know he said it wasn't a distraction, but it's going to be. There's no way it's not going to be if Jamar isn't practicing next Wednesday, isn't practicing next Thursday. It's going to become a distraction at some point if it keeps going on this direction.
Yeah, and because I think everybody in the building knows that they have a real Super Bowl opportunity here, and the last thing you want is something like this. I don't think that Jamar has lost the locker room over this. They all understand the business part of it, but you start sitting out games, with 2 years remaining, then maybe people start looking at him differently. I do think one of the more subtle, underrated, everything's gonna be okay moments in this whole thing, and that's where we see all this stuff anymore, is on social media. And the Bengals account tweeted something yesterday, and I don't know the hierarchy there. I don't know if the social media team has. I would think for something like this they would have to get approval up the chain, but I don't know if you guys saw it or if you saw it, Dallas, but they tweeted out a picture of two guys practicing with the caption, "We talking about practice," and it kind of making light of the whole situation and going with the Allen Iverson thing. We're like, this is practice. We're not talking about games. We're talking about practice. It's not a big deal. And I thought that was really kind of telling, because I think that had to get approved by upstairs.
Yeah, you would think so.
For them to tweet something like this. So I don't think there's a lot of concern that I never did think he was going to miss games. And I know this kind of reopens the debate, but if I'm betting, I'm more than willing to put down a sizable amount that he's out there week one against the Patriots.
I agree. All right, let's talk about the practice squad. We had a few more moves made today. The Bengals signed 12 guys to their practice squad yesterday, so they had 4 open spots. They signed 4 guys that we'll get into in a minute. One move they made on the 53, Travion Williams is back. He tweeted out that it was roster gymnastics, the reason he was cut, and it ended up being just what he said. McKinley Jackson, the rookie defensive tackle, goes to injured reserve. Travion Williams is back on the 53 as the third running back. Then the practice squad, the Bengals added 4 more guys to fulfill their 16-man squad. We've got running back Kendall Milton, defensive tackle Justin Rogers, defensive end Isaiah Thomas, and guard Tayshawn Manning. We've talked about Justin Rogers before, I believe, Jay. The Bengals met with him during the pre-draft process. He was waived by the Cowboys. Now he's going to be another big body. I think that the Bengals will have give a chance to get some playing time, maybe eventually as a nose tackle body that they've been looking for. The guy I want to talk about, though, is Kendall Milton. I mean, we know the Bengals love their Georgia connections, so we've got that box checked. 6'1", 230 pounds, so he's a bruiser, I think, from that perspective. I looked this up before we started the show. Among Power 5 running backs with at least 100 carries last year, Milton was 5th in yards after contact per attempt. That is like an incredibly important metric to me when I look at running backs, like who can generate their own yardage after contact. They're not just relying on the scheme. I think running back is a position where we've all been kind of wondering, are the Bengals going to make another move? We saw Samaje Perine today on on a deal, so that option's kind of out the window. But we've all been wondering if there was going to be another move. Travion is obviously the third running back for now, but I think Kendall Milton, he's an interesting option on the practice.
Yeah, he is. There's a couple of things about him. One, he went to Georgia, so he's good. The other thing, the Eagles drafted him. The Eagles have been one of the best drafting teams, and so there's a lot of upside there just based on that alone. The Eagles also cut him, but it's a numbers thing. It's a crowded room thing. So I think it is. It's a really interesting pickup. I thought the Travion thing was interesting. I thought maybe they were just going to bring it because with the way Zach talked about McKinley Jackson, he said he's further along than those other two guys. That's why he didn't go on IR. So I assumed that he was going to be good to go, and I thought maybe they would just bring Travion back on the practice squad, and then you get three game day elevations. So they just first 3 weeks they elevate him on game day, and then figure at some point somebody's going to get hurt, and they can bring him to the 53. But with McKinley Jackson, yeah, maybe he is going to be healthy sooner than 4 weeks, but he's still a rookie who missed a lot of training camp. He needs more time in meetings. He needs more time watching game film of his teammates once they get in and start playing real games. So I think this is going to help by just putting him on the shelf for 4 games. And that allows you to do that, to get Travion on the 53. And they had to, if they had brought Travion back on the practice squad, they still would have needed to sign Milton or another running back. You can't, still think about it. 69 players and only 4 running backs. That is very light at that position. But I think Milton has a lot of injury, and at some point we could see him up. Injuries are an issue, and if Travion is up and doing his thing as a kick returner, it wouldn't surprise me at some point to see Milton up on this 53-man roster.
Last thing before we dive into our listener mailbag today, Jacoby Brissett is going to be the Bengals, the quarterback the Bengals are facing in week 1. The Patriots decided to roll with him over rookie Drake May. I don't think it's necessarily surprising. I was expecting Brissett to start all summer. Dakota Randall, who covers the Patriots for us, has written about that training camp battle all summer. And Brissett, I think, did not look great in the preseason, whereas Drake May showed a lot of impressive flashes. So I guess there was some question about who would be the starter, but Brissett is going to be the guy. Does this change anything for week 1? I think, there's just such a talent gap between where the Patriots and Bengals are right now on both sides of the ball, especially on offensive line. I am expecting the Bengals defensive line to be all over this Patriots offensive line in week 1. Jacoby Brissett has a lot of good qualities. Navigating the pocket and avoiding pressure is not one of them. So I would say from that perspective, that this is a good thing for the Bengals, that they're not going to have to face a more mobile guy in Drake May.
Yeah, and I think it's a known commodity where you know what you're getting. Week 1's such a wild card anyhow. You throw a rookie in there, and who knows? Maybe he has the game of his life coming out of the gate. And I didn't watch a lot of the Patriots in the preseason, so I don't know how big that chasm was between the two. But you're right. Jacoby Brissett does some things well, but he's been in the league since 2016. Here's a quiz for you. Who has more NFL starts? Jacoby Brissett or Joe Burrow?
But because you're asking the question, I'm assuming it's Burrow. But I know Brissett, he's only started really 2 years? Is that right? The Browns the 1 year, and then he had the year with the Colts, and maybe I'm forgetting another year.
Yeah, it's close. But Burrow does 52 for Burrow, 48 for Brissett.
Okay,
but this is interesting, and it kind of goes hand in hand with what you said. Where he does take a lot of sacks, doesn't avoid pressure. The reason he takes sacks is he doesn't put the ball in danger. Yes. Since he was drafted in 2016, his interception percentage is 1.4. That's the 4th lowest in the league in that time among quarterbacks with at least 300 attempts. The only ones that are better are C.J. Stroud, Aaron Rodgers, and Sam Bradford. Tom Brady's behind him. Drew Brees is behind him. Joe Burrow's behind him. Joe Burrow does not throw interceptions. Burrow's 23rd on that list at 2.0. So Brissett's going to take care of that. He might eat the ball, but he's not going to give it away. So again, I think the pass rush is going to be key. And then obviously the Patriots have a really good defense, and the Bengals are going to have to put up points. But I think it's just the known commodity part of it, I think, is better for the Bengals than just having this wild card coming in with a first round pick making his first career start. which has not gone well for the Bengals in the past.
Yeah, with quarterbacks, I feel like it's always a sliding scale between you either take a lot of sacks or you put the ball at risk and throw interceptions. And Brissett is definitely at the extreme end of taking the sacks in lieu of throwing the ball into harm's way. So it's a great point there. Should we dive into these questions? We got a lot of questions from our listeners. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions. We really appreciate it. I mean, it's getting engagement with all of you guys and listening to this. We seriously really appreciate all the effort you put in with these great questions. We got a lot of good ones we're going to get through here. Let's start with some on this 53-man roster and our takeaways from this. We got a couple questions here that are in the similar vein about quarterback. Steve-O asked, is there a team willing to trade for Jake Browning? And M. Goots asked, do you think the Bengals look at other QBs? He doesn't see much upside with the current group of backups. Jay, what do you think about this? Your thoughts on Jake Browning and the other backup options behind Joe Burrow?
Okay, no offense to the people that submitted questions, because we appreciate all of them. I don't understand these two. I mean, yes, every team I think would have interest in trading for Jake Browning. He proved himself to be one of the best backups in the league last year, kept this team afloat. I think he's firmly entrenched, and they've got him under control for another year after this. It's just I don't think there's any interest in moving on from him as their backup. I don't know what they could get for him, but you look what's behind him. That's the big question here is, does Logan Woodside stay on this roster, beyond a few weeks? They did bring him back on the practice squad. They had to. You can't go into some teams don't have two. They have two on the 53 and don't have a man on the practice squad. That's playing with fire. The thing is, there's nothing out there. I mean, you look at it, and Ryan Tannehill is available, but a guy like that's not going to come and sign on a practice squad. He's going to look to be a backup somewhere. Warren Sharp made a list of the best remaining free agents available after Ryan Tannehill. It's Trevor Siemian. You want to go back to that? And then Brett Rippon was on that list, but the Vikings just signed him this morning. I mean, other than that, it's Kellen Mond, Nathan Peterman, Nate Sudfeld. So right now, stick with Logan Wilson. He knows the system. He did struggle. I mean, he looked good in that preseason opener, but then he really struggled in the two starts after that. But I don't understand wanting or even questioning whether Browning could be on the move. They've got a gem in him, and they've got him for cheap, and they've got him for multiple years. That is an ideal scenario in my mind, especially given Burrow's injury history. You never know when he's going to miss games again or how many. So, I think they're really well positioned with Browning as the backup and no need to move off of that.
They signed him to an extension when they didn't have to. I mean, they gave him a deal because they want him to be here. Jake Browning was 7th in EPOA plus CPOE composite last season. Yeah, that is incredibly impressive for a backup quarterback to have that good of advanced metrics. I think even in a good offense like the Bengals had last year, I think Browning would make sense for any number of teams. I think he's one of the best backups in the NFL, but there's no reason for the Bengals to give him away. I do wonder, like my thing is for next offseason, what if, Brian Callahan's in Tennessee now? What if Will Levis, I can never say his last name. Levis. What if he struggles this year? Was Brian Callahan interested in someone like Jake Browning as an option next year? Maybe, but I don't think that's anything that's going to happen this year. And you're right. Looking at this list of free agent quarterbacks, it's not great. Tannehill, I can't believe he's not a number 2 somewhere right now. I can't imagine he's going to sign a practice squad. Yeah, Nate Sedfeld, CJ Beathard, Trevor Siemian. I mean, you could sign AJ McCarron. He's still out there, I think. Is he still playing football? I don't even know.
I mean, he's coaching his kids baseball and football, and he's happy doing that. But I could see them bringing him back. I really could. On the other hand, if that is in the cards, why hasn't it happened yet? So, maybe they're waiting to see. Maybe he needs to get through something else. He talked about what a thrill it was last year coming back to Cincinnati, actually getting into a game and playing, and his kids being able to see him play. But at some point, I wonder when he just sees the writing on the wall that it's probably not going to happen, and sticks with the UFL or just sticks with coaching his kids, which he seems to love, and they're getting that age where they play these sports, all sports, and he can be around them all the time. So I think it's an option, but I don't know how realistic of an option it is.
Let's talk running back. This one is from Fletch. This Bengals running back room is not very deep. What moves do you anticipate with the lack of depth? I kind of think this is it. They brought Travion back today. I don't expect them to make another move. I think if they were going to do that, they would have done it, right? They would have claimed somebody yesterday. They would have tried to add somebody yesterday. I've talked about it plenty on this show. I really did think Samaje Perine was going to be an option for this team, but he's in Kansas City now, so that is no longer on the table. I think the Bengals have big plans for Zach Moss and Chase Brown, and I don't necessarily think at this point that they need to go sign somebody. I mean, Kareem Hunt, Jerick McKinnon are still out there maybe as pass catchers, but I think they like what they've got in Brown and Moss, and Travion will play his role. So at this point, we talked about Milton on the practice squad as an intriguing option. I'd be surprised if they do anything beyond that, Jay.
Yeah, barring injury, I think you're right. Yeah. The Perine, I'm interested to see what that contract's going to look like with the Chiefs.
Same.
Because the Bengals called him. They tried to get him back. I just keep going back to 2 years or last year when, they gave him, they offered the same amount that Denver did, and he didn't even give him a call. He just took off and went to Denver and kind of left him wondering what happened. I don't know. Was there something about playing a mix and shadow? Was there something just didn't jibe well with the coaching staff here? It seems like it's a one-way courtship here, and I was surprised. I really did think there was a good chance he was coming back, and the fact that it didn't happen 2 years in a row, it might be time to shut the book on that ever happening again.
Yeah, I was just trying to see if those contract details have come out yet. I don't think they have, but I'm very interested to see too. What did the Chiefs give him? I'm sure it's a 1-year deal at this point, but what does that money look like? What does that guarantee look like? Were the Bengals in that mix at all? I would love to see if we get some reports that come out on that. Another question here in the running back room from Derek. What is the expectation for the running back room in terms of percentage of carries early on? Do we expect Moss and Brown to be in a Mixon Perine relationship, or will it be more similar to last year where Mixon wasn't sharing the carries as much? Jay, you happen to write about this exact subject, the Bengals running back splits and how they just divvy up carries and targets and everything like that. You wrote about that last week. How do you see this playing out between Zach Brown and God? I confuse these running back names every single week. I swear I say Zach Brown every single show. Zach Moss and Chase Brown. How do you see these carries being split up, at least early in the season?
It's because Zach Brown is an awesome artist, and it just rolls off the tongue. They haven't said what their plan is. You kind of get a gauge by watching in practice. I think you kind of have to just follow the logic too, where, they love Chase Brown and his potential, and he's looked great in camp, but he is still a rookie or a second-year guy who, as a rookie, didn't do a whole lot, whereas Zach Moss is this veteran, and he's been in this league for a while. And I don't think it's going to be Moss is Mixon and Chase Brown is Perine like last year and that kind of crazy split. But I don't know that it's going to be super close to 50-50 either. I mean, I think they're going to lean on Moss early. Say the first 4 weeks. They're just going to lean on him a little more. And now maybe Chase Brown gets as many snaps and he's used more in a receiving role and that type of thing. But as far as carries, I just, Chase Brown looked a little indecisive in that preseason game when he played against the Buccaneers, and Zach Moss was sick that day, didn't play at all. We haven't seen Zach Moss play in the preseason, but we have seen him play the last several years in Buffalo and Indianapolis. They know what he can do. And I think short yardage, goal line, they lean on Moss more. And just overall, first and second downs, I think he's going to be kind of the guy they lean on early and kind of test the waters with Chase Brown in the run game. But it's not like Chase Brown's just going to be on the sideline doing nothing like he was last year for the first half of the season until he got hurt. He's going to be involved. But as far as carries, I think you're going to see a decent amount more from Moss, at least through the first 4 games of the season.
I would agree. And I guess my question is, do we see it more like a true split where Moss is handling the early down work and Moss is handling more of the passing down work and subs in on third downs? Or do we see it what some teams like to do where it's rotating based on series, right? Like one running back will get a drive, then the next running back will get a drive. I think either one of those could be in play, right? I think both of these guys have skills and talents that they offer. And you're right. I think Zach Moss is brought here to be that grinder who can break tackles and just play in the middle of the field, the kind of running back that you need in the modern NFL. Chase Brown is going to be the guy who plays in space. And I really do like how those two running backs complement each other. But I think it's very much up in the air exactly how they're deployed. I think you're right, Jay, that Moss, as the veteran, as the guy they went out and targeted this offseason, I would expect him to see the most carries, at least early on. But there is nothing stopping Chase Brown from just grabbing that role by the horns. And by the end of the season, maybe he is the RB1. He averaged, 25 carries or something in college at Illinois. He was a true workhorse back in college. We know he can handle that role if asked. It's just kind of a question of, can he hold up in the NFL in that kind of role?
And I think that's the ideal scenario, is he does take that over, because I'd have to look at the numbers, but I think Zach Moss has been a much better pass protecting back. And now Chase Brown, again, didn't do it very often. I think that would be the ideal scenario, where Chase Brown is in there on first and second down. Then Zach Moss is the guy, the Pirine, that you can trust, that you know is going to be in there on third down, can run it if it's third and short, get you the explosive run if at times, can catch the ball out of the backfield. And then Chase Brown is in there as just this more dynamic, explosive guy on first and second down, where you're not quite sure what the team's going to do.
That's interesting.
So yeah. I think that's what they would like to see happen. But again, I think a lot of people are so enamored with Chase Brown's potential, and the proving ground just isn't quite there yet. And I think it's just going to take a little more time to earn that. I don't even know. I lost the word I was going to say. That vaulted role, I guess. An increased role.
Yes.
It's going to take a month or so, and then I think we'll see that kind of settle in.
And just to Derek, who asked that question, we know that was a fantasy question, kind of cloaked as a football question. So don't think you put that past us. We know that was a fantasy football question.
I wonder how many people are going to be able to get both those guys on their team. Yeah. Guys love the handcuff rule. But there's so much potential for both of them that I wonder, once one goes, somebody's going to jump in and grab the other. So
yeah,
if you guys are listening to this and you actually get both those guys on your team, I'd love to see a screen cap, see what the rest of your team looks like, because I think it's going to be hard to do. I think it's ideal to do. I think it's going to be hard to do.
These next couple could be kind of fantasy related questions. This is from Mike. He asks, Andre Oshavas, Jermaine Burton, Mike Gesicki, Chase Brown, who ends up as the number 3 receiving option for Joe Burrow this season? This is assuming Jamar Chase plays, which I think we all think he'll be the number 1 option. Okay. T. Higgins, number 2. I think for me, I'm still going with Andre Oshavas. I was so impressed by what he did last season as a 6th round pick out of a smaller school. Very athletic guy who I think showed a lot in his rookie year. Now he's going to get the opportunity to be that number 3 receiver, at least to start the season, play in the slot, play on the outside if Jamar moves into the slot. I really do think he's going to be out there a lot. I also expect the Bengals to run different formations and alignments than they have in the past, though. So I think that means we'll see more 12 personnel than we have in the past. I think we'll see Gesicki in the slot, as a big slot option. So I do think there are a lot of options, I think, for that number 3 pass catching role. But I would say in my mind, Oshavas is still the guy that I'm still pegging for that role, and probably to end up 3rd on the team in targets when we look at the end of the season.
Yeah, I think I'm going to lean Gesicki there. And because of what you said, I do think that this running game is going to be better. And I think we've kind of seen it the last few weeks. They're leaning into 12 personnel a little bit more, and you can get Eric All on the field, and he's such a threat as a blocker and a receiver. And I think that's going to cut into Yoshi's snaps somewhat. And we know what you're going to get from Gesicki. Joe Burrow makes tight ends. He leans on those guys big time. And especially, you get down the red zone, I think Gesicki can be a real weapon. And they've really developed a really cool chemistry. Just watching those guys, when they work on the back shoulder stuff in practice, it's not perfect, but no matter where that ball is, Gesicki is really athletic at leaping and twisting and making those grabs, and that goes a long way in establishing trust. And I think Gesicki is going to be the guy that, if we're targets, catches, yards, whatever it is, he's going to end up being the number 3, because if they are running a lot more 12, then it's Yoshi coming off. It's going to be Chase and it's going to be Higgins that are the 2 receivers out there. So I think Yoshi's going to have a great year, but I think Gesicki's going to have a monster year for what a Bengals tight end can be. He's never going to be, a Kelsey, that kind of just a high volume guy. But I really think Gesicki's going to be the number 3 guy when it comes to all those targets, yards, receptions, touchdowns.
Couple more on the receiver room. We got a couple here that are similar. This one's from Peyton. Obviously, Jermaine Burton is someone that has lots of talent and can help the Bengals win now. With that being said, when does his production on the field outweigh his issues off the field? Similarly, from Malone Jr., does Jermaine Burton take over at midseason, at least in front of Trenton Irwin? We know what he is. Burton can be a difference maker. Defenses would have to worry about him a lot more. Jay, what are your thoughts? I know we've seen Jermaine Burton get involved on special teams. I think is a good way to get the ball in his hands. We've heard him talk about that maybe he could have done a better job over the summer of taking everything related to football a little more seriously. And we knew that he entered the draft with some of those off-field red flag questions. How do you see his role kind of emerging or evolving as his rookie year progresses? Do you think we'll get to November and December and maybe he is that wide receiver 3 behind T and Jamar?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to grow throughout the year. To the first part of the question, his production on the field already outweighs anything off the field. It's not like there's crazy stuff off the field, but he went the 3rd round. He's still here. He's on the 53. I mean, that's out. The good's outweighing the bad right now. And the question is the bad ever going to outweigh the good? That's what you have to worry about. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows that, but it doesn't look like it's on track for that to be the case. And it feels like this is a kind of a growth issue and a grasping of the scheme. And I think you're going to see them package him, give him a small package early, and then expand it as the season goes. The question is what can he do on special teams besides possibly returning kicks? Because if he's going to be that back of the receiver room guy, he's going to have to play on special teams in order to be dressed on game day. And that's how you get in and get to take that small package and increase it and make it bigger. But I think a lot of people were hoping that, all the talk about him being 1st-round talent, they stole him in the 3rd round, that this was going to be hit the ground running and just great. And it doesn't work like that all the time with rookies. And it hasn't worked like that with Jermaine Burton. But I don't think there's any reason to sour on his potential. It's just going to take a little longer than expected. And like you said, maybe it's November, maybe it's next September. So we'll see. But I do think that the off the field, whatever it is, whether it's, what they said on the broadcast about him sleeping in meetings or that type of stuff, I don't know that that's that big of an issue yet to worry. But he came in with some red flags. There's still some existing questions. He needs to get it straightened out and do that part of it in a hurry and then start getting in the playbook. And I do think you're going to see things open up and he's going to be a much bigger part of this offense in December than he is in September.
This one's from Chris. Now, this one is kind of a little obsolete now that we've already seen all the roster moves, but I did think it was an interesting question about the tight end room. He said neither you or Jay kept Tanner McLaughlin on the 53-man roster. That's true. He did make the roster, though. So this question was more so saying, what is the 2025 tight end room going to look like? Gesicki and Hudson are on 1-year deals, and Chris is saying that's why he thought McLaughlin made the roster, is more of a future outlook. I would agree. You're thinking about that. Even if we think Gesicki has a solid year, he is on a 1-year deal. If he has a solid year, he's going to go sign with somebody else, I would think. We've seen that in the past with CJ Uzama, with Hayden Hurst. That you mentioned it before, Jay. Joe Burrow makes tight ends. He makes tight end contracts. Tanner Hudson, depending on what he does, he could come back next year. But I think you're looking at a tight end, a future tight end room of Eric All and Tanner McLaughlin together that could work really well. And if the Bengals were worried about him, Tanner McLaughlin, that is, getting claimed off waivers, then it does make sense that they kept 5 tight ends and ended up keeping all 10 draft picks. And we saw the roster machinations they were able to do with Trevion Williams, who was someone that they were confident wasn't going to get scooped up. So I think that the way that the Bengals ultimately kind of made their hierarchy of importance with those last few roster spots and ultimately kept Tanner McLaughlin, I think it's a really good point that is a move towards next year, not necessarily saying that Tanner McLaughlin is going to have a huge role this season.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's a great point. Chris, you said we had that question.
Yes.
because we haven't in practice. We haven't. It's not like Tanner McLaughlin's looked great, and they're just like, oh, we just don't have room for another guy. I mean, he didn't get a lot of reps. He was running with the threes a lot, and every now and then with the twos. And I think it's keeping him was based on potential, what he can develop into, and for roster management for next year. Because you mentioned Hudson and Gesicki on 1-year deals. Drew Sample's basically on a 1-year deal. Yep, he signed for 3 years and $10.5 million, but the Bengals have an out after this year. They can cut him, and no dead cap money, no penalty for cutting him after this. So realistically, they've got 3 of their 5 receivers on 1-year deals, and then the 2 that aren't are rookies. So I agree. It was a great point, great question by Chris. I do think this was all about 2025.
I agree. And we'll talk about Eric Hall here in a little bit. We've got another question about some players that I'll get into Eric Hall in a little bit. But I am very excited about this Bengals tight end room going into next season. Last question here, kind of on the 53-man roster takeaways. This one's from David. What is the sentiment on Hunter Reka? Do you think the Bengals see him as a good investment, or will they do a swap with Brad Robbins when he is healthy? So Brad Robbins, punter, 6th-round pick last year out of Michigan. It was placed on IR with a designation to return, so he could return after a 4-game absence. Hunter Reka, for now, I mean, he's got the job, and I would say that this is kind of an extended audition. I don't think the Bengals are planning to bring in competition. I don't think that they would do that in this 4-game sample that Reka is going to get. If he's good, then the Bengals can kind of extend Robbins' window. After that 4 weeks is up, they might have to make a decision on when to activate Robbins, but they'll get a long runway where they can let him ramp back up into action. As long as Hunter Reka is punting good or punting well, I think he'll keep that job. If he's not punting well, I think they'll probably speed things up with Brad Robbins and try to get him back on the field as soon as possible. But this will be a 4-game audition, I think, for Reka to make his case to stay on this roster even once Robbins gets healthy.
Yeah, I think it's an ideal scenario because, like you said, he's going to get thrown into the fire. He was inconsistent in the preseason. Now you see, what can he do when the games are real? Is that going to continue? If he punts in these first 4 games like he did in the preseason with some great, some so-so, and some bad, he's not going to be long for this team. And you bring Brad Robbins back after 4 weeks and you move on. You're basically just extending the competition. I think they know what they have in Brad Robbins. So letting Rico get out there and do his thing. And it's not ideal to have kind of an experimental role when you get into the regular season, but we've talked about it. These 3 of these first 4 games are just so winnable, and you don't feel like even bad punting is going to be the difference. Now, I know hopefully you're just not punting that much. Yeah, well, hopefully the volume is just low. And I know the margins razor thin in NFL games, and every little thing can turn them. But and there could be some flashbacks when they go to Kansas City in week 2, because Rico's had some of those. Yeah. He's had some of those down the middle low punts that the one that killed him in that AFC Championship game at Kansas City in 2022. So. But I think this is a really good chance. When you're doing a punting competition, you split those reps, obviously. Give Rico the full load for 4 weeks, see where he's at, and then you make the decision. Even if he's punting well, I still think they keep Robbins on the practice squad. I don't know that even if a team has a punter injury, that Robbins would be the one they would come for and pluck him off of the practice squad. So I think this is a really good way to further evaluate a competition that didn't have a clear winner.
I don't even know if they'd have to put him on the practice squad. Like, you could probably just delay his return so long, with those designated to return rules, unless he's fully healthy and Brad Robbins is like willing to file a grievance and say, I want to be on the field because I'm healthy. I think you could probably be like, well, we'll keep you on the IR designation to return list for just a little bit longer and see how things go. And maybe not even have to risk placing him on waivers to get him through to the practice squad.
Yeah. And that probably would be the way they would go, is just keep him on IR, because you don't have to designate them to return basically by opening their 21-day window to practice, and then they have to return after that. So they would, but if he's on IR, another team can't poach him. But if they do activate him and then end up swapping those guys around, or maybe he goes up for a game and Rico goes down the practice squad and they flip him.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, is where somebody would come poach him. But
Sure.
And maybe they do carry one on the practice squad all year, because it's a position that they've just not been able to figure out since Kevin Huber left. And it is an important one, even though it's not the most important, obviously. It's cost them games. It's cost them a shot at a championship before. They got to get this right.
All right, let's go into some questions about the 2024 season. I'm going to throw this one to you, Jay. These kind of are similar, so we'll group these together as well. This one's from Luke. What is stopping the Bengals from winning the Super Bowl? That's a pretty basic question. From Brett, what are the biggest concerns leading into the season? So what is, if you're going to identify one or maybe a couple of things, Jay, that you're still concerned about this Bengals roster going into the season, where would you put those issues?
I mean, I think it starts with run defense, and especially with McKinney Jackson now on IR, missing 4 weeks. You don't have a true nose. They couldn't stop the run. I mean, we talk about all the explosive pass plays they gave up last year. They got gashed in the run game too, and by the teams in this division. It's a big reason they were 1-5 in the division. Really 0-5. I don't even count that Week 18 game against Cleveland as a win. So they've got to get that right. Nick Chubb's going to be coming back at some point. Now Derrick Henry in Baltimore. Pittsburgh's going to be a running team, even with Russell Wilson at quarterback. You got to get it. It's a passing league, but the run defense is still a big part of this, and they've got to figure that part out. I think the secondary is going to be all right, and we know the offense is going to be all right. So, either special teams, the punting side of it, I have no worries about Evan McPherson. So special teams, punting specifically, or run defense. Those are the 2 big question marks going into the season. And even if they don't fix them completely, I think they are good enough to overcome them, but they could be fatal flaws. And so that's where the questions lie.
For me, it was the similar type of thing. It's the interior trenches, actually on both sides of the ball. Because I think on offense, I think that Ted Karras, Cordell Volson, Alex Kappa is okay, and it's what Joe Burrow knows. It's not any different. It's not. There's no changes there. But I think any objective person would have to say that interior is a bottom half of the NFL interior, maybe bottom third, and that's okay. That's okay because Joe Burrow is really good at manipulating the pocket, gets the ball out quick when he needs to. I think they can work around that, but I do think. It's worth asking a question of if that interior pocket is ever going to become a problem. But I agree with you. I think the real question is on the interior of the defensive side of the ball. Can they stop the run? BJ Hill, Sheldon Rankins, Chris Jenkins. These guys are more pass rushers than they are run stoppers. They don't really have that big-bodied guy after losing DJ Reader. It's hard to replace a guy like DJ Reader. There just simply aren't that many guys with that size who have that skill set. So it was never realistic for the Bengals to replace that, and I think they'll try and do it more in the aggregate. But it's a realistic concern that you don't have that body. And even if BJ Hill and Rankins and Jenkins are pass rushers more than run defenders, none of those guys are really that true number one interior pass rushing threat that a lot of teams have now. They're complementary guys. Sheldon Rankins can absolutely get after the passer, but throughout his career, he's been more of like a number 2 pass rusher, not a Quinnen Williams, not a Dexter Lawrence, a guy who's really an elite pass rusher. And again, that's okay. You can't have elite guys at every spot, but if we're going to point out the weaknesses, I think that's where it's at. And I think it's okay to also mention the edge, given the injuries that they've seen at edge rusher. How is that going to affect Sam Hubbard's ability to slide inside, as a pass rusher? How is that going to affect Joseph Osai's ability to slide inside as a pass rusher? How does that lack of depth with Miles Murphy being injured and Cam Sample being injured, how does that kind of affect things? So I'm right there with you. I think it's trenches on both sides of the ball, but the defensive interior, I think if you're pointing to one area, that's where it's at. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, we could see them go to that 5-man front if this defense is really settled down on the back end and the DBs are playing well and Von Bell's got everybody on the same page. I could see him going to the 5-man front and obvious rundowns and kind of leaning on quality there or quantity there over quality. And the other thing is, I wrote about it earlier in camp and BJ Hill just taking such exception to the fact that he's a passer. He really believes he is a very good run defender, and he's proved it in practice and these joint practices. He's looked great against the run, and it'd be interesting to see if he kind of steps into that role even a little bit more, and kind of makes you forget about the fact that DJ Reader's gone and McKinley Jackson's on IR. And I think he could be a real secret weapon for this team this year.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. This one's from Johnny. It's a very long question, so I'm going to abbreviate a little bit. He says, am I overthinking that this Bengals offense is going to be even better than people think? He mentions you're merging the two styles of offense from last year, Dan Pitcher's ideas. The Bengals aren't going to have as much tape to study on what they're going to be doing, or their Bengals opponents won't have as much tape to study on what the new wrinkles might be for the Bengals. He says, with Joe Burrow, is this a top 3 offense? I think top 3 is hard to call it that at this point. There's a lot of good offenses in the NFL. We at PFN did our offense rankings. We all voted a couple weeks ago. We had the Bengals at 11th. I think that's a little low. I think in my rankings I had them a little higher, but I mean, you look at teams like the 49ers, the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Lions. I do think there are offenses around the league that are set up to succeed a little better than the Bengals. That's not saying I have any doubts about how good this Bengals offense can be, though. I really do think that this Bengals offense is going to have a lot of success this year. I'm so excited to see what things actually look like. And Johnny mentioned in his question how they merge the two different styles of this Bengals offense, of what Joe Burrow wants to do versus the play action and the boot stuff and what it actually looks like. But top 3, I think it's hard to say because there are just so many good offenses, but top 10, absolutely. And I do think they could be higher than that, maybe top 5. Top 3, it's a little hard for me to predict that.
Man, I'm trying to rack my brain and remember. I think I put him at 5 when we did those rankings, which means some people on the staff put him way lower for the composite to be down at 11. But I agree with you. I really do think that this has a real chance to be their best year offensively yet, and under Burrow. And just as he makes tight ends, he masks offensive lines. We saw that by getting to the Super Bowl in 2021. So even though, like you said, there might be some questions on the interior of this offensive line, he can make that work. And you just look at the weapons around the run game. I think is going to be so much better this year. They were going to go to more under center stuff last year till the calf thing happened. I think you're going to see, kind of a development and evolution of Joe Burrow as a quarterback this year. And just the fact that he's been healthy and had an entire training camp, I think is huge. And I really do. I think this is going to be a special year for this offense, especially if it's complementary football. It's cliche, but if this defense, which looks a lot better, can start taking balls away and giving this offense short fields. And I wonder too, when you talk about top 3, are you talking about yards? Are you talking about points or points per drive? It depends on what metric you use. A lot of them go hand in hand, but sometimes they don't. Yeah. But I do. I think this is going to be an upper echelon offense this year, as long as number 9 stays healthy.
I think we're talking DVOA and EPA per play. We've got a smart audience here. We're not going by yards. We're not going by yards. We're going by the advanced metrics. I looked up our rankings. You had them at 5. You're right, Jay. You had the Bengals offense at 5th. You were the high man. I had them at 7th. I was the number. Actually, no. We had Dakota. Let's see. Yeah, I had them at 7th. I was the number 2. Everybody else had them at 9 or lower. So that's who brought those rankings down. Don't blame Jay or I for where we had the Bengals in those offensive rankings. And you go ahead.
I was saying Zach Taylor and Brian Collin have been on record many times. We've asked them about this. Not DVOA or any of those other stats. Points per drive is what they look at as the most important telling factor. So that's one to kind of keep an eye on. You kind of have to look for it. It's not an easy stat to find, but that's one to really keep an eye on this year, because that's what they put the most value on, and that's where they want to be top 5.
It's in the Pro Football Referenced Advanced Offensive Stats page if you're looking for that metric. I know for a fact it's there. This one is kind of similar to what you just said a couple minutes ago, Jay. This one's from Brady. After watching the team all offseason, are you more confident in the offense or the defense? He's got another question here that we'll get to in a minute, but what's your thought? Are you more confident in the offense or defense going into next year?
Yeah, I'm way more confident in the offense, but not down on the defense. I thought they looked really good in training camp, in the joint practices, in the preseason games when the twos are out there playing against the Bears one and the Colts ones. And I think this is going to be a much improved defense, but there's still questions. There's more questions on that side than there are on the offensive side. So I would say I've got way more confidence in the offense.
It's you basically have to. I mean, there's no way you could say you have more confidence in a defense that was bottom 5 in like every metric last year. But I am very optimistic. I think the one thing you can point to is the defense actually has more continuity on the coaching side than the offense does this year. I mean, they've maintained most of those coaches in place. Lou is still here, whereas the offense is seeing a little bit of change with the coordinator. So I think that's interesting. And then that's how Gino and Von Bell play on the back end is to me what's going to end up determining this. I mean, there was so many issues with communication that I think getting those two guys back there, it's not going to be what maybe Jesse Bates and Von Bell were, but it's going to be such a step up from what Dax and Nick Scott were offering at safety last year that's where I'm most excited about what this defense is going to look like. Brady's second question was, what unit on either side of the ball are you most confident in? You cannot pick quarterback. I am going to stick with what I just said, actually. I think safety. I'm so excited to see how those guys play. I know Von Bell had a down year last year. He was playing with a terrible Carolina Panthers defense. You know, it's very hard to thrive when everybody around you is playing poorly, when your coach is getting fired at midseason. There's tons of upheaval. I kind of write off last year for Von. I'm just very excited to get him back here and to pay him $1 million or whatever the league minimum is. Amazing deal. Geno Stone is just a playmaker. I mean, we saw that last year against the Bengals, obviously, but he was second in the NFL in interceptions. Him playing that deep safety role, I am so excited about. So for me, I think that's the position group that I'm most confident in. And to say that safety is the most confident position group I'm in and from where they were last season is kind of shocking. But I think we haven't even mentioned Jordan Battle. To have him as a third safety and Dejon Anthony and Tyson, you're deep there. You've got the high-end talent, but you've got the deep options too. So I think safety is where I feel good about going into next year. What about you, Jay? Do you have a position group that you feel really strongly about going into next year?
Yeah, when I saw this question, my answer was just going to be DBs in general because you throw the cornerbacks in there with that. But I'm with you. I mean, Jordan Battle, how many teams would love to have that guy as their number 3 safety? And Dejon Anthony looks like a rising star in this league. And it's funny because you talked about the continuity. That's the one position they lost was their safeties coach. Rob Livingston is now going to be making his debut tonight. He's Deion Sanders' defensive coordinator at Colorado. But you've got the continuity with Lou and Vaughn is essentially a coach on the field. And I have the most confidence in that position group, which is weird to say after last year, but it's a totally different room than last year. I mean, it's Jordan Battle is the only holdover. Even Tyson Anderson was here last year, but he never played on defense.
Yeah.
I don't think he played a single snap on defense. He was all special teams.
Yeah.
So, you've got 3 new guys. If you want to count Von Bell, he is new if you're just looking at last year and this year. So I really do think we're going to see a major difference in that pass defense this year because you just extended. And like I said, with Jordan Battle, that competition between Dax Hill and DJ Turner, Dax won it. DJ Turner didn't lose it. DJ Turner played really well this preseason. So how many teams would like to have that as their third outside corner? The one question I have is, Mike Hilton's getting up there in age, and he does look like he's lost a step. Mm-hmm. He's incredibly smart and instinct-driven, and I think that can make up for a little bit of losing some speed. But
especially in the slot too. I mean, instincts and everything. Yeah.
Exactly. And if it does happen where he's struggling, DJ Turner can go in there and play. And then Josh Newton, the rookie, they've been working him at slot the last couple of weeks, I think, for that possible scenario. So I just think they're loaded at both of those, corner and safety. And it's going to be a strength of this defense this year, whereas last year it's what killed them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both you and I had Jalen Davis on our 53-man projections. Bengals cut him, and I think that it shows a lot of confidence, right, in Josh Newton and his ability to play the slot, and DJ Turner as well. But I don't think that they would have cut Jalen Davis unless they felt good about Newton at least having the capability to slide inside if needed. From Chris, who will be the most surprising player, good or bad, this year for the Bengals? Jay, I'll let you take this one first.
Yeah, I kind of spoiled it earlier, but I think BJ Hill is in for a big year. And you don't get noticed a lot. I mean, look how DJ Reader was still kind of anonymous throughout the league, not among players, not among coaches, not among front offices, but fans. It's a dirty grunt job in there with not just doesn't get a lot of attention. But I think BJ Hill can take a huge step in that regard. And, last year he had a couple interceptions, been a long time since a defensive tackle had interceptions in back-to-back games. He made plays that way. He can get in and affect the passer. If you've got Rankins next to you and you've got, Hendricks and Hubbard, Murphy when he gets back, Osai looks better. You got that pressure coming off the edge. I think BJ Hill can just have a really big year overall, and it's contract year. It's time. I mean,
That's right.
I do think he's the guy that can really surprise people this year.
No, I love that pick. I think for me, among starters, it's Cam Taylor-Britt. I think he is going to have a really good season. Now that he's got the better protection behind him at safety, I think we could see him ascend, and maybe we're looking at him as like a top 15 corner league-wide after this season. We'll see. Maybe that's optimistic, but I do think that he has that within his range of outcomes. I think if we look maybe at more tertiary players, I'll go with one on each side of the ball. Your fellow Fairfield High alum, Eric All.
Yep.
I would not be surprised if he is seeing a lot of reps by the end of the year. He's kind of the one tight end they have, maybe McLaughlin down the line, but right now the one tight end they have that can kind of be a two-way player in terms of blocking and receiving, playing in the line, playing in the slot. He can kind of do it all. And maybe we're not expecting that to really come to fruition until 2025. But man, from what I've seen during the preseason and just clips from training camp, I think that there's a chance by November, December that maybe Eric All is just the tight end one on this team. And I don't think that's completely out of the realm of possibilities. On defense, I'm still holding out hope for Joseph Osai, man. I think this is, talk about a contract year, talk about a guy who has a lot on the line. He's got the opportunity, at least early, with Myles Murphy being injured, with Cam Sample no longer around in the depth chart. If it's going to happen, I think this is it. This is going to be his chance. He's not going to be a starter, but he's going to be playing a lot of snaps in these first 4 games. And I think this is really his opportunity to get his career back on track and really set himself up for a nice payday. We remember how much Carl Lawson got after he was a kind of a complimentary rusher here in for a while. He got $345 from the Jets. I wouldn't put that out of the realm of possibilities for Joseph Osai if he can really step up this year.
Yeah, and now Lawson's on a practice squad. It's surprising how, they made the right move there with the Hendrickson over Lawson thing. If I'm going to throw in a tertiary one, I don't know if you can call a first-round pick a surprise, but I think Amarius Mims has a chance to be a real dude in this league, and he's looked so good in camp. And if that pectoral injury, it's still on the table for him to start week 1. And even if he doesn't, he gets back by week 2, week 3. When he's healthy, I do think they're going to go to him instead of Trent Brown. And I think he's got a shot to really be something special this year.
This one's from Jimmy. He says the window for the Bengals is open now. His question is, how long can this ownership keep the gang together and remain competitive? We just can't be Joe and Jamar forever and succeed. I think there's something to that, but I also think that Joe Burrow was right when he said the Bengals' competitive window is his entire career. That's if you've got the quarterback, you are going to be good pretty much regardless of how else the rest of the roster looks. Having said that, I think the Bengals will eventually have to make some tough decisions. They don't do things like the Eagles and Browns where they're pushing money into the future and using these salary cap tactics to create space. They like their general kind of old school contracts. And when you do that, you're not going to be able to keep everybody together. You're not going to be able to overextend yourself. And I think for the most part, that's okay. We're not going to ever see the Bengals do a roster purge or a reset year where they have to get their salary cap in order. I think it kind of can be Joe and Jamar and everybody else on this team. I really do. I think that people often underestimate how much NFL rosters turn over, right? This roster in 2 years is going to look incredibly different than it does now. And you think that guys who are cornerstone pieces, they're just not. NFL careers just don't last that long. Turnover is so high. I think if the Bengals, you've kind of already seen their plan is we got to get cheap on defense. They've invested so many picks on defense, knowing they're going to be spending so much on offense. You keep hitting on those picks, and obviously that's a crapshoot, but you stay cheap on defense. You make targeted free agent signings like they did this year. I don't see any reason that that plan can't sustain the Bengals going forward. And I just don't ever see a spot where they're going to get into a position like the Saints or even the Bills where, oh my God, we're overextended. Yeah. We've got to take a season and kind of get back on track. That's just not going to happen for this team. So I think the way they run their cap, the way that they've approached the draft and approached free agency, I think they're in a good spot. And even if it is Joe Jamar and everybody else, I think that's okay in the modern NFL.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I know there's another question coming. I don't want to get into this too much, but you do what you did this year. You draft 10 guys and all 10 of them make the 53. Yes. You go out in free agency and you get smart, affordable guys that really fit your scheme. They stole Mike Gesicki. Trent Brown cost them next to nothing. Even Zach Moss is going to be a huge part of this team this year. They didn't pay that much for him. They might have overpaid for Rankins. Maybe those kind of buys in free agency are going to have to go away a little bit as these contracts start accelerating. But that's how you keep it going, is you have off seasons like they did this year. So yeah, the gang, all your favorite players, they're not going to keep them together. It's just, it's not possible to do in this league the way they want to do it. But everything you said is spot on. That's how you do it. You have a dude at quarterback in Joe Burrow. You keep Jamar here long-term. You keep the most important ones here, and then you just keep filtering guys in, draft well, let them play 4 years, and then wish them well on the next step, and you just keep turning the page, keep turning things over.
But you have to hit on your first round pick. So I think this year will be big on that. Let's see if Dax Hill can finally offer something, right, as a starting corner. Miles Murphy is not going to get the opportunity right off the bat, but let's see what he is by the end of the year. You've got to hit on those early round picks, I think, to maintain the sort of plan the Bengals have. So this year, from that perspective, I think is huge. This one is from UK Cincinnati fan. He says, I've loved some of the play action and varied run game we've seen in the preseason. Do you think the days of Joe Burrow throwing the ball 50-plus times a game are gone outside of situational football? What do you think about that, Jay? What are your takeaways, or how do you think this offensive scheme is going to look different now that Brian Callahan isn't here? We've got Justin Riscotti and Dan Pitcher and some other new voices. Do you think things will look different? Do you think this is all just speculation that's not going to come to fruition? How do you see this scheme looking in week one?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that we're not going to see as many 50 attempt games, but you got to remember too that with the RPOs, they view that as the run game. And even though it's technically a pass on the sheet, I mean, it's something that Burrow excels at. And I don't think that's going away. I do think they are going to try to run the ball more, especially knowing that they've got that explosive element now with Chase Brown and Zach Moss, whereas Mixon, you just kind of knew what you were going to get. You're running the ball to run the ball. You get 4 yards and make the next down more manageable. So I think that's the plan, but it's still – and Joe Burrow obviously has the right to check any play. There could be a run call, and he sees the defense, and he's like, nope, we're passing. So I don't know that those kind of days or games are going to go completely away, but I do think you're going to start seeing less of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see more play action and more under center. I think those things league-wide have shown to be very effective for offenses, but I just don't know that Joe Burrow wants to do that stuff. And this offense is going to run through Joe Burrow, and I think whatever he's willing to do is probably going to be what the end game is. They're always going to be a pass-happy team. I don't see they're never going to go away from that with Joe Burrow. Last year, they were second in pass rate over expectation, even with Joe Burrow missing a lot of the season. So even in situations where maybe other teams would have run the ball, they were still throwing, even with Jake Browning. And I just don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So even if there's little changes and we see little ticks up in play action and under center and some of the other stuff that we saw under Jake Browning, Joe Burrow still controls the show and what he wants. I think if he says, I want the spread attack, I want to do quick decision-making, I want to see everything, I think that's what they'll probably do to make him happy.
Why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? These last couple, I think, are more Jay-centric. So I'm gonna toss most of these to you if you're ready, Jay. This one's from Dizzle Rules. Are the Bengals making any improvements to the scouting process or anything similar? I feel like the draft has way more misses than hits anymore. The only thing I'll add to that before I let you say something, Jay, on this is the draft, for the most part, is kind of a crapshoot. I mean, if you're targeting the right positions, the right premium positions early on, for the most part, I do think that is kind of the best NFL teams can do. But I do think that the Bengals are probably a little farther behind in terms of scouting staffs than most NFL teams.
They say it might sound cliche, but it's absolutely true. And it's quantity over quality. Sorry, opposite, quality over quantity.
Yeah.
They've got such a small staff. They do a great job. And, today in the Athletic, there's an article on an anonymous article where agents talk about things in the league. And one of the questions was, who's the next GM in this league? And Steven Radishevich and Trey Brown both got votes in that. Trey Brown was one of the leading vote getters in that. You've got really quality guys here, and they've been able to keep them. The guys have had opportunities to go elsewhere. Mike Potts on that list as well, to be assistant GMs and take that next step up. And they have so much more input here, and working with the coaches and really shaping this roster and just the family atmosphere. And they want to be here. And I think that's a big part of it. Scouting is such a grind. It's such a hard life, such a hard job, and you want to be happy doing it. And I think that's a big part of it. The other part of this is I disagree with the premise of the question. You go back to these recent drafts, not just this year with the 10, 26 of the last 28 players they've drafted, going all the way back to Evan McPherson in the 5th round in 2021, are still on this team in some capacity. And the only 2 that aren't retired, Jeff Gunter and Wyatt Hubert. I mean, you've got, DJ Ivey, a 7th round pick. He's on PUP. You got McKinley Jackson's kind of on IR. You've got guys like that are on injury list right now. But these 6th round picks, these 7th round picks are contributing to this team. The 5th round picks, I think they've done a fantastic job in the draft the last few years. Now, 2021 was awful. The Carmen, Deontay Smith didn't work out. There were so many misses in that draft, but you offset it with the Chase and with the McPherson. Like you said, it's a crapshoot. But I think they've done a really, really good job these last few years when they've had to do it. Now that you've got Burrow and the contract, you really have to hit on these draft picks and not just the early ones and make sure they play right away, but build the depth with those late round guys. And they've done it. I mean, last year, not just Ivy, Brad Robbins, he's on IR maybe, but Yoshi Voss looks like he's a great pick. Chase Brown is a 5th rounder. 2022, Tyson Anderson in the 5th round. He's one of the best special team guys in the league. Getting Volson in the 4th round, and he's been a 3-year starter. You're not getting all pros, but you're getting the kind of picks you need to do to keep a roster sustained when you've got these guys at the top of the market, like Jamar Chase is going to be, like Joe Burrow already is.
And I think the Bengals historically, they stick pretty close to like the industry consensus boards too, which I think always makes them look good in like post-draft evaluations. But I also think it's like a good strategy. Like why there are so many people out there evaluating prospects. I think going for reaches or going off the board typically doesn't really work out. They stick pretty close to where the value is. And I think that works out for them. And I'm curious to see like what NFL scouting looks like 10 years from now, just in general, with all the advances in technology and tracking and databases. Like what's a scout's life going to look like in 10 years? My vision of the scouting future is that, guys grinding film and all that is kind of going to go away, that scouts will be more like private investigators, and that their main goal is to find out about players' personal life and his drive and his, football intelligence and stuff like that, and leave all the other kind of on-field stuff to more tracking and data analysis and things like that. I'm curious to see what scouting even looks like 10 years from now and how that affects the Bengals' small staff.
And the Bengals do. I mean, when they go on the road and watch games, they don't just show up Saturday morning and go to the games. They meet with these guys on Friday night, talk to them, and they talk to everybody around the program. And that's why it's such a hard job. It's not just flying city to city on Saturdays and going to the games. It's the couple days leading up to the games and really diving into the background on all these guys.
This one is from Marvel Hacks. Coincidence or trend that the Bengals' record against first-time starters, that they struggle against first-time starters? It seems like these struggles have covered several coaching staffs. Bengals are not going to be playing a first-time starter in Drake May in week 1. They will be facing Jaden Daniels in week 3, who will be making his 3rd NFL start. What do you think, Jay? Is this something that is true? If you looked into the numbers, do you from your history with the Bengals, is this something that you think that they often struggle with, and why is that?
It's absolutely true that they struggle with first round or with quarterbacks in their rookie year or their first start. I would lean more toward the fact that it is coincidence, just because as you mentioned in the question, it's spanned several coaching staffs.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do this. I'll look and see what. I don't know if I can have the bandwidth to do what every team is against those kind of quarterbacks, but maybe in the division or maybe teams that have sustained success, what their record has been. I think it goes back a lot to the wild card element, where you just don't know what you're going to get with one of those young guys.
Yeah.
And it would seem like it's easy to beat them, but sometimes they just come out with a gunslinger mentality, like let it just rip, and it works out. And you get behind to a guy like that, and then all of a sudden the confidence soars and he can start making some smarter plays as the game goes on. And it's harder to confuse guys. I think quarterbacks are coming out of college now so much more prepared and ready to go and expected to step in and play right away instead of sitting and learning for a couple years or even a year. I'd have to look deeper into it to see how other teams are, but it's clear, and I should have had this pulled. I know I tweeted it not long ago, but their record against quarterbacks making their first career start is surprisingly bad.
So thankfully, Jacoby Brissett was starting, so they won't have to deal with that in week one. So good for the Bengals on that one. A couple more here. This one is from Vienna Jeff. He actually has two questions. Do we get Joe Burrow every Wednesday from now on in terms of media? And then he also asked, how do waivers work? I actually had this question too for Jay. So Jay informed me on this. Vienna Jeff was wondering, do the Bears get the first crack at every free agent on the waiver wire, or is it like fantasy football where where if you make a waiver claim, you go to the end of the order and then it resets after you make a claim? Jay, you filled me in on how this works. Would you like to fill in the listeners as well on how waivers work?
Yeah, well, first, Joe Burrow, yes, every Wednesday we'll get him, or if it's a Thursday game, we'll get him on Tuesday. But yes, he has a weekly press conference from here on out, and he is also required to do a post-game press conference after every game, as long as there's no injury. As for the waivers, it's not Chicago. Chicago had the first round pick, but it's Carolina. When you get Chicago traded for that pick, so now it reverts to the actual finishing order. So Carolina is number one on the waiver wire. And no, you do not go to the back of the line after you claim somebody. That's why they were able to grab 3 cornerbacks off of waivers on Wednesday, because they own that number one spot, and there's no shuffling of it. Not only today, yesterday, whatever, when they make picks, that lasts through week 3. They do not use the current standings to establish the waiver wire until after week 3. So Carolina could continue to have the number one pick if they start 0-1, 0-2, 0-3. But they're guaranteed to be the number one pick on the waiver wire until at least week 3. And it's the reason they got the 3 cornerbacks, and I'm sorry, I can't remember their names, but they could have, if they only, like, say they were 10th in the order and they only wanted to get 1 cornerback, they didn't want to have to cut 3 guys. They could have put in claims for 3 of them and prioritize those claims and say, hey, once we get one, then just pull the other ones back. We only want 1. So there's ways, there's contingencies that you can use with the waiver wire. But yeah, the Bengals are going to be 18th on that list until week 3, and then it'll come down to what the current standings are.
We didn't really get any questions about the KJ Henry waiver claim because we mostly asked for questions before that happened. But yeah, I did think that KJ Henry claim was kind of interesting. I looked up some of his numbers on PFF. Among edge rushers this preseason with at least 50 pass rushing snaps, number 3 in pass rush win rate, 4th most pressures, number 9 in PFF pass rush grade, number 11 in overall defensive grade, 4.63 40-yard dash, big school, 6'4", 255. I'm not surprised, like, having seen it, that the Bengals wanted this guy. I mean, he seems like he fits everything they look for in pass rushers. Last season, he didn't get a ton of opportunities with the Commanders, just a 6.2% win rate as a pass rusher. Even after the Commanders traded Montez Sweat and Chase Young, he still didn't get a lot of runs. So it still to be seen, like, how he plays once he gets into regular season action and if he even has a role on this team. But I did think it was a pretty interesting claim yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, you knew they had to get a defensive end.
Yes.
They were just so light there. And I was wondering the same thing, why did Washington cut him after getting rid of Sweat and Young? You would think that would be in it. You've got to get younger there. You got to start building the depth up there. So I don't know, but it's an interesting pickup. He's a coach's son. His father is a head coach at North Carolina A&T. I love the connection where he's born in Southeast Ohio, so he comes from the same part of the country as Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow wasn't born there; he was born in Iowa, but he grew up in Athens. Obviously, Joe Burrow's dad coached for Ohio University, the best university in the land, and KJ Henry's dad coached at Ohio University as well. So before becoming a head coach, so I think he's got a shot to possibly work his way onto this 53 at some point, if there's injuries. But even though they're thin now, they're going to get Miles Murphy back after 4 weeks. So it could be just a year of development on the practice squad, and then maybe targeting 2025 where he can really step in and make an impact.
Yeah, I would say from the Commanders' perspective, I mean, they signed 3 free agent defensive end this offseason, including 2 guys who played with Dan Quinn in Dallas. They drafted a guy in the 7th round, got a new owner, got a new GM, got a new head coach. I mean, that just happens. Guys fall through the cracks when new regimes come in and they add their own guys. So it just happens, I think, even though Henry did really play well throughout the preseason. Coaches like their own guys, and Dan Quinn brought his own guys in, and KJ Henry wasn't one of his guys. And I think it could just be as simple as that. Last question here from Houday Rick. This one is for you, Jay. If the PFN Bengals podcast fought the Growler podcast with Paul Dehner Jr., which side would Jay Morrison be on? Jay, that's all you.
I'm a lover, not a fighter. I seriously, I've been in one fight in my life, and that was first grade on the school bus, where some kid clunked me in the head with his metal lunchbox, and I took him to the ground and was making him lick the floor until the bus driver broke it up. And I was a very late bloomer. Like, I was still a shrimp in my junior year in high school, and between junior and senior, I shot up. I'm 6'3" now, so I was not someone to go around starting fights, and I'm a pretty likable guy. I'm not going to ruffle feathers. So I'm not going to piss people off. And so I am not a fighter, and there's no reason to fight anyhow. This is one big family.
Of course not.
I say that sincerely. Like, I think that the people that cover the Bengals get along as well, if not better than any other beat crew in the league. Just this past Saturday, all the beat writers got together at Mike Petralia's new house. We normally do this in the summer, but he was moving, so he finally got his new house. It's like a housewarming party / the Bengals beat reporters get together, and we all got together and just kind of a kicking off the season kind of gathering, and then we're going to do it again a week from today, next Thursday. All the beat writers are going to come down. We're going to do one podcast where we go through our predictions and picks for the season. So we all get along great. There's no reason for anybody to fight. Yes, you want to get scoops first, and there's competition in that regards, but there's a genuine like for and respect for all the people on this beat and all the people doing these podcasts. And it's a great question. It's a funny question, but there's no reason for anybody to fight.
No, it is a great beat. As someone who reads just a ton of NFL coverage from all over the NFL, Bengals fans are so lucky to have Jay and Paul and Kelsey and James and everybody who covers the league. And not just that, but Bengals Twitter too. People, amateurs who aren't writing for a publication or maybe doing this for the love of the game. Amazing content being produced everywhere on the Bengals. So I think Bengals fans are very lucky from that regard. And there's no fights going on between these two podcasts. I mean, not to be sappy, but like if not for Jay and Paul, who I read, religiously throughout high school and college, I would not even be doing this job. So thank you to both Jay and Paul for me even being here. So there is there's no fight or animosity between any of our podcasts here.
He just made me feel really old.
Hey, you've been doing this a long time.
Which I am.
I think that is all we've got, Jay. This has been maybe the longest episode of all time of the PFN Bengals podcast. I think we're going on hour 20 here. Thank you again for all the questions. We are so excited for the season. We're doing this season 2 of Jay and I together. We are so excited about going into this season and have high hopes for the Bengals, I think, going into next week. So football is finally back. I think we're all ready for it. Jay, anything else before we sign off for today's episode?
No, just really excited to get this season going. It all kicks off a week from tonight. the Ravens and Chiefs. I think a lot of Bengals fans, that might be one of the most watched games by Bengal fans that don't involve the Bengals. So
Yeah.
I'm just ready to get this going. I'm happy that the regular season's finally here. The training camp has its moments, but it's a grind, and just really excited to kick this off and see where the season goes.
We'll be back next week. We'll drill down into that week 1 game against the Patriots, get into all the details on that. So make sure you tune in next week to the PFN Bengals podcast.